He's complaining about the weather.
Sydney.
Hi.
All right, can you guys see me? I'm not sure.
You're like a little dark.
I know everyone.
Bunch of wise guys.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming in person and joining us online. Today is our second month of RPM training. Today we're joined by a ton of new RPMs here in the room, so welcome. And we also have some attorneys. And thank you, Mary and Jade, for bringing treats. Today is a really, really important topic, writing your RAOs. Please ask questions and engage. We've got an expert in the room, Eric Spalvins. And, you can't delete a site, which is ultimately where we're trying to go until you meet your RAOs. So let's write the best RAOs so we can meet them and then delete our sites off the NPL. With that said, I'm going to hand it over to Eric. Feel free to put comments or questions in the chat and I'll moderate. And I'll also be babysitting David. Make great days.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We're gonna try to do something. We're trying to do something a little different with the audio and the visual here. We've done a lot of hybrid. I know, right? We're trying out something new. We've done a lot of hybrid meetings lately. And so I wanted to try to do a hybrid training format and see how that worked. I helped teach RPM 201 in Kansas City, and some of the feedback we got was about trying to do offer and trying to figure out how to do hybrid training. So we are trying to have one camera on the speaker, one camera on the audience, so that it feels like the people at home are kind of in the room. Have you guys? I'm assuming that that camera's on you all. Yeah, that camera's on the audience. So I'm assuming that the people online can see the screen and two cameras. Is that correct? Can somebody verify that for me?
Yeah.
We can. Yes.
Thank you, Tim. All right, good deal. Okay, so all right, so my name's Eric Spalvin. Lee asked me to come and talk about RAOs. Over the last year, I helped out headquarters a couple of different ways through a detailed SARDB. Those are the folks in OSReady that read and review all your decision documents, not all of your decision documents, most of your decision documents, right? So I've taken what I learned and put that kind of in a lessons learned format. I've been doing this for about 16 years. And I'll say all the new RPMs, it took me 5 years to figure out what the job was about. And then about 13 years before some of this stuff started to click. And it wasn't until I started teaching and reviewing like high volumes of documents that things really started to gel for me. So this is a lot of lessons learned for a mid-career, perspective. So, well, here's what we're going to talk about. We're talking about RAOs. Let me see if I've got I don't have my pointer working yet. Give me a second. All right. So we're talking about what are RAOs? Where does the term come from? It's from the NCP. Why are they important? How can you guys write better or more effective RAOs? How the way we use RAOs changes as we go through the cleanup process. And then I'll have Lee ask me to add on some tools for preparing better decision documents at the end. So we'll talk about it at the end. First of all, we'll start with the NCP. Everybody knows what the NCP is, right? This is the implementing regulation. Nice. Yeah, right. This is the regulation that implements CERCLA, right? So CERCLA is the law we work under. NCP is the regulation that implements that, the law. And it lays out the rules of the road for our program, responsibilities of the agency, and roles for individuals that are working in the program. Oh, and I'll say, the NCP, the first NCP was like in 1968. But it's evolved over the years. This is a picture of a 85. This is from a PDF of a 1985 version of the NCP. My PDF joke is that the NCP is so old that some of our Our documents are sold, the PDFs are yellow. Yeah. But we've got lots of experienced seasoned RPMs and managers that have like the hard copy of the NCP that they got like in 1990. And you'll still see those around. But for those of us who weren't here in 1990, I mean, we used PDFs. And so the PDF that I use is a version that I downloaded back in probably 06 or 07. And it has lots of highlighted stuff in it. And you guys will all find your way to come up with a similar process that works for you guys. A good website. This is the public facing NCP website that you can use for reference and get links at. Right now, my favorite tool is this ecfr.gov website, which has a really easy to search and use interface. You can search all of the CFR. At least the ECFR, and it's organized nicely. And one of the great things about it is, unlike the PDF versions of all these documents, you can easily cut and paste text out of these things. And you can right click over here and copy the citation. And so if you're sending a nasty letter to somebody, or if you put something in a document, you quote the NCP, like it's really easy to do that here. And the part that we're on, this paragraph is 300-120, which is the general responsibilities for on-scene coordinators and RPM. So this is where your job description starts. Two other resources you should be aware of are the preambles to the proposed rule and the final rule. These were at one point really hard to come by, like almost impossible to find because they were not easy to get to online. But the proposed rules is what they look like. The preambles look like. Both of these have got good context for what EPA had in mind when they passed the NCP. So as you're trying to interpret the NCP, you can use these documents to help understand some of the nuance that is maybe not there. And it also has a lot of, in the preamble, the final rule, it has like comments and EPA responses to comments. So you can see somebody in 1990 said this about what was in the draft NCP, and EPA will say, oh yeah, we didn't agree with that, so we left it, or we agree with that, so we made these changes. So it's pretty useful when you get into like the real drawn out, interpretation of NCP to have these, and you can full text search them too, which is lovely. One little other thing I'll add, this is a public facing SIMS document collection. That's what these links are. If you ever have issues navigating document collections, let me know. I'm pretty good at that. So my favorite parts of the NCP, the parts that are most useful for me as an RPM, are the parts that explain why the program exists, and then also what is my job as an RPM. And so in the preamble to the final rule, there's a couple of statements that I want to point out, and this is about the bias or prompt action. And this is language that we ought to keep in mind. Does anybody feel like we accomplish prompt action in our program? Does that happen ever? That's what we're supposed to do. That's what Congress wants us to do. That's what they told us to do. And there's a lot of tools for us to do that. So it's important. This is what Congress had in mind. And then this is also talking about implementing remedial action in phases, operable units, expedite actions, reduce risks quickly. But now to the job description piece of this. The RPM and the OSC are discussed together in this part of it. The RPM OSC directs response efforts and coordinates all other efforts at the scene of discharge or release. That means RPM is responsible for doing this work and making sure it gets done. Nobody else has that in their job description. Everybody else's job description is something else. And so if you ever feel like you're the only one that wants to see a site move forward, that's because you're the only one whose job it is to make sure it goes forward. Everybody else is to make sure we don't make mistakes, that we cover our tails, that we don't find ourselves in pickles. But they are not rewarded or incentivized to make sites move forward. You are. 120F1, this talks about, the RPM is the prime contact at sites. Coordinate, direct, review the work of EPA, states, and local governments, Corps of Engineers to assure compliance with the NCP. It's the RPM's job to make sure we're compliant with the NCP. So you need to understand what's in the NCP. You need to understand how to use it. You need to understand how to explain what you're proposing to do or what you're doing is consistent with the NCP. It's not an insurmountable task, and there's lots of people that help you make sure you do that. So don't feel intimidated by that, but that is that core, like one of your core responsibilities. And then this other part of green, the RPM recommends actions or decisions by lead agency officials. When you're talking about decision documents, you're generally talking about the division director. You might be getting a decision document, if you're lucky, signed by the administrator, on a high profile site, high dollar site, the system administrator, you'll get to go through that. And several of us have had to go through that process. It's not a lot of fun, but your job is to present the information to the lead agency official that's signing the document and make sure that they're comfortable with your recommendations. So you get down, this is for non-fund finance, and I put this is interesting because there's other things here that you're responsible for. You're assuring compliance with the NCP. This is non-fund, so this is like PRP sites. Assure compliance with the ROD, compliance with the consent decree, compliance with the administrative order, and lead agency approved plans. So it's a lot more involved in that because some of those things, we have these other non-EPA parties that are doing these actions. And then this is another part of the same section that says RPM shall participate in all decision-making processes necessary to ensure compliance with the NCP. This is in reference to state Superfund contracts and agreements with other federal agencies. Under response operations, the RPM and OSC are their job is to direct response efforts and coordinate all other efforts at the scene of discharge or release. Now, when you're doing PRP stuff, you might find that they're pushing back against you, or they want to like go off on themselves and come back with you like 6 months later. And they can do that, and you can let them do that, or you could also decide that you need to be more involved. It's kind of up to you. Then this 135C is an important part about what your job, the different decisions you've got to make, let's see, we have collect pertinent facts about the discharge and release. What is it from? What caused the release? What are the pathways to human and environmental exposure? What's the potential impact on human health and the environment? So this is your risk assessment part of this. What are the priorities for protecting human health and the environment? So prior to prioritizing what you do first, how you approach a site, what your site strategy is, that's something that you're responsible for. And a lot of that takes the shape of talking with management, talking with your site team, getting everybody together, and then coming up with a shared vision, moving forward with it. Let's see, in 300, 400, here's some more language. The agency shall, number one, engage in prompt response. State participation, conserve fund monies, be sensitive to local community concerns. So like talking to the community, get input to the community, finding out what their priorities are. That's not an optional task. That's something that we're supposed to do. That's what the shall means. It doesn't say should or might, or if you feel like it. Consider treatment technologies, use the response team. Some of these things are less like like this. I don't know. I don't want to touch that again. I didn't know it was touchscreen. Encourage the involvement, technology. So these things are important things for you to think about, but those are the two pieces that I think are most important for us. Now, 300, 430 lays out the RFS process. Won't go through all this. Remedial investigation includes your risk assessment piece. RAOs are first mentioned in the feasibility study part of the NCP. And I'm going to try to go real fast through this. In the RFS part of this, there's some key passages that I think people should think about and try to remember and maintain a sense of urgency about responses. Remedial actions are to be implemented as soon as you have the information to do so. That means if you have enough information to make a decision about part of a site, it's okay for you to go ahead and do that. You don't have to wait. Now, strategically, you may decide you want to wait. That's okay. But you can get going as soon as you're ready. The program goal, you probably have seen this language if you've done your decision documents. Select remedies that are protective of human health and the environment, maintain protection, and minimize untreated waste. The next layer is the project management principles. Sites should be remediated in operable units to achieve risk reduction, or when phased analysis of response is necessary based on the size or complexity of the site, or to expedite the completion of the site cleanup. Again, this is about giving you tools to move sites through the process more expeditiously. Operable units should not be inconsistent or preclude a final remedy. So you don't want to accidentally or intentionally get yourself in a position where you can't do your final remedy because of an interim remedy. And then site-specific data needs, the evaluation of alternatives, documentation of the remedy should reflect the scope and complexity of the site problems. So don't make it too hard. Don't make it more complicated than it needs to be. If you break a glass on the floor and you want to sweep it up, then sweep it up. Don't spend, 30 minutes arguing whether you want to use the vacuum cleaner or the broom or just replace the floor. Like, just get on with it, right? And these are the program management principles. So the way I look at it is the program goal lays out your big picture goal, your principles lay out a little bit more detail, and the next piece of this is the expectations. And so we expect to use treatment to address principal threats, use engineering controls for low long-term threats. I wish they had come up with a better term than low long-term threats, but it's what we have. Or where treatment is impractical, use a combination of methods to achieve protection of human and healthy environment. So that's treat the principal threats and combine that with engineering controls. Use institutional controls. This is interesting during the conduct of the RFS. So like you can do, and you should have institutional controls in place to eliminate exposure during the RFS. That doesn't mean a restrictive covenant, right? Institutional controls have a lot of different variations of flavors. A restrictive covenant is kind of this gold standard that we try to achieve, but there's a lot of smaller institutional controls and information controls that you can use at a site that will help you limit exposure. So that's, it's okay to do that during the RFS. Let's see, and then we shouldn't use institutional controls to substitute for active response measures. And if you are going to include them, you've got to make, well, I'm not going to read all that to you. We've got to use innovative technology, return groundwaters to beneficial use whenever practicable. This is another piece from the RFS. Scope and timing of these activities should be tailored to the nature and complexity of the problem. So again, we're being told this. This is in the scoping part of same section. Investigation and analytical studies should be tailored to site circumstances, appropriate to the complexity of site problems. Feasibility study, the development and evaluation of alternatives, the same language, scope and complexity of the problems. Yes, ma'am.
Like maybe 2 sites where they are doing non-time critical. I think one is a non-time critical, one is a time critical during while we're still doing the RIFS.
Yeah.
And so like for one of them, they're going to do some institutional control as part of like post removal controls or whatever. How do you or what would you do if you're like dual tracking, these actions or whatever to make sure you memorialize like kind of what you were starting out in your RI, because that would not have included what ends up being done ultimately? Or would you suggest that the program say, hey, you halt the FS until you're finished with this non-time critical because it's time sensitive?
I wouldn't halt anything if you don't have to. You can always supplement an RI or an FS with a tech memo or other information to document what you need. We are supposed to have a smooth transition between removal and remedial, so we can explain what we intend to do along those lines. But we don't have to have every document that supports it, like the future remedial action. It doesn't have to be all in one RFS. It's okay for there to be pieces that come together. It's the job of the proposed plan to explain where to find the information, right? And so we want to present that information to the public. We shouldn't allow, kind of administrative type, like what's going to go in this document, what's going to go in that document. We don't want to like hold up the forward momentum of the site. So we can document that in different ways. And if you look for, there's actually a quote about that we're going to talk about in a second. So this is where RAOs are in the feasibility study portions. 430 E21 talks about RAOs, PRGs, and ARRs. So establish remedial action objectives specifying contaminants, media of concern, exposure pathways, and remediation goals. Right. So that's kind of 4 things there. And then it goes on to talk about PRGs, and then it talks about ARs, and this goes on. It talks a lot about ARs there. This is where RAOs are defined in the NCP. And I'll mention this is the thing I was talking about. Under the remedy selection portion of the NCP, it talks about proposed plans, and this is a key sentence. The selection of remedy process for an operable unit may be initiated at any time during the remedial action process. So that doesn't say after your FS is done and signed. It doesn't say you have to have an RI and an FS, and it says anytime you're ready, anytime you have the information to make the decision, you can start that decision-making process. Now you can decide to phase it, or you can decide to wait and do it all later. But if you know, for instance, that ICs are a piece of this, or that, if you know that you've got a little part of it that you can make a decision on, you can go ahead and get that going, even as you're continuing to finish up an FS for another part of the site. You just have to be able to explain to the public, for this decision, these documents in the AR support this decision. You can read them, learn about them, give us your comments, and then you can move forward with the ROD. Yes, sir.
This is in the proposed plan section. Is that little r, little a, or the actual RA? It comes after the RD.
This remedial action process, this is in the, I would say this is in this F. This section F is about remedy selection.
But you said you could start it initiated at any time during the remedial action process. Is that the remedial action or during the whole process?
This is the broad remedial. I think that's what Congress meant, or this is what EPA meant when they wrote that about what Congress meant, right? All right, so we talked about, now we're getting back to what's an RAO. From the NCP, RAOs specify contaminants, media concern, exposure pathways, remediation goals. The proposed plan section of the ROD guidance says RAOs describe what the proposed site cleanup is expected to accomplish. What's it going to do? My favorite reference that I found is from RAGZ, which is the Superfund risk assessment guidance. And I think this is the best summary of it. What we're going to achieve, what our remedial action is going to achieve in order to be protective of human health and the environment. Specify contaminants, media, exposure pathways, receptors, and remediation goals. Now this risk assessment step is in the RIFS process, right? So we're still talking about remediation goals. But this gives us so this kind of gives you like 5 components to the RAO. Now, why are they important? The main thing that RAOs do is it links the exposure pathways and receptors to the specific remedy components. So the parts of your remedial action that are going to fix that unacceptable risk, it connects them. In the FS and the proposed plan stage, you have your unacceptable risk, which should be reflected in your RAOs. Then you develop a PRG, and then you evaluate remedial alternatives. When you get to the ROD, it's a little different. You have unacceptable risk, the RAOs, you select your cleanup levels, and then that connects to remedial components. So at headquarters, they're knocking around the idea of calling this the remedial logic, that we want to see like a clear line, a clear string of thinking that connects these pieces together. And so we'll talk about the 5. Usually there's 5 parts to an RAO, not always, but for now we'll just say there are. What's the contaminant? If you have one COC, just name the COC. If you have a group of COCs, like SVOCs or creosote-related compounds, you can name the group. Otherwise, if you have a lot of them, you can just say COCs or contamination. We don't want it to be overburdensome. Media of interest, what is the contaminated media? What's the exposure pathway? How is it getting to somebody that's causing an impact? I have inhalation and vapor intrusion here. This one is kind of interesting because inhalation is how it gets into your body. Vapor intrusion is how it gets into a building. So it's not exactly the same thing, right? Receptors, who are you trying to protect? You could say future residents. You could say construction workers and residents. You want to be as specific as you can. If you have to, you could say human health receptors or eco receptors, but you want to try to be as specific as you can. It gets a little burdensome sometimes if you have a whole bunch of different things, a bunch of different receptors. And then the goal of either the PRG or the cleanup level is to tell you, how are you going to know when you've achieved your REO? How do you know you've been successful? That's pretty important thing for you to know and a real key feature of an REO to tell so that you know where you are going to end. You can provide actual concentrations. You can reference unacceptable risk levels, or you can say cleanup levels if you have to. Again, when you start having like 20 COCs and some of them are MCLs and some of them are state ARs and some of them are risk-based numbers, it just gets to be a real mouthful. Yeah, Lee.
Can you just speak to the piece, like, that the COCs come from the risk assessment and the receptors come from the risk assessment?
I will, yes, we'll definitely get that.
I was just gonna say, I think it's important, and you probably know, it's not gonna cover it, that you may have multiple REOs covering multiple media. You may have a groundwater restoration REO, you may have soil, direct exposure, principal threat waste REO, so you're gonna get into like REOs for different things.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, it's REO training. It's 2 hours.
Just like some people think like one big long REO, no.
No. You want to have, you want your REOs to be specific to both the unacceptable risks that you're addressing and also to remedial components. So you may have a situation where you have different remedial components that maybe address the same risk in some ways. You may have, so yeah, you want to make sure you have as many as you need, but not too many. So the other component is the purpose of the action. And this becomes, it's really important for the folks that are at the end of the process, the 5-year review and deletion folks. They want to know what is the purpose of the REO. And so headquarters is kind of toying around the idea of like recommending some purpose, some language about purpose. Restore is if you've got groundwater or surface water, you're going to restore it to its beneficial use. Prevent is when you want to stop to the extent possible with the goal of getting to zero. Like you want to get down to zero, you're going to prevent, you want to have nobody drinking this water. That's good prevent REO. Minimize, reduce is when you want to decrease to a specific level, like not zero, but you want to get it down to a level that is appropriate. This is sometimes they're trying to move people to like a standard framework of purpose for the REOs. And we're working on guidance with on that right now, but it's taking a long time. And this training is part of that process to start doing some trainings on the topic. And then we'll do a NARPM training on it. And then we're going to continue to focus on this. Let's see here. All right. So then this is an example for a soil RA, direct exposure. What I've done here is, and people have been color coding REOs for a long time. I have the 5 components plus the purpose, and I've highlighted them. This is one that I did for one of my sites. So our purpose of action is to prevent risk. We go ahead and name our contaminants. We got 4 of them. We name them. The media of interest is surface soils, and we're specific that we're talking about 1 foot to the surface. Our exposure pathways are ingestion, dermal contact, and/or inhalation. Receptors, future childhood and adult residents, and cleanup level is the residential cleanup level, which is in a table in the raw. Let me see here. I just shuffled these out. So here's a groundwater restoration example. This one's a little different. I did this color coding. We're restoring. This one is actually from the proposed plan, but it's the contaminants are COCs. Media of interest is groundwater. Exposure pathway is drinking water. The receptors are really the people drinking the drinking water, right? So it's kind of implied, and this kind of drinking water kind of covers both bases on that. So you don't really need to say, you know, people drinking drinking water. You could just say drinking water, right? It's kind of assumed. And I think that's fine. The other thing about RAOs is it's all kind of a judgment. There's a lot of judgment in these things. It's not a one size fits all thing. And then the cleanup goals, this is where it gets a little more complicated. We have MCLs, state standards, and if there's not an MCL, a health-based number, right? This is one from a proposed plan, so it's not final yet, but it's pretty good. Now, there are different types of RAOs. Excuse me. So this thinking is from the closeout end of the program. Restoration actions, we talked about that. Containment actions, your source containment or groundwater containment. Institutional control actions are kind of their own subset. And then source remediation actions. And what I just was working on this last night and digging through, talking with Amanda Van Epps at headquarters. In the closeout.
So Matt, how are you doing?
Of what's that? Do we have a comment online? No? Okay. In the 2011 closeout guidance, they say for the purposes of that guidance that source material is either source in the traditional way that acts as a reservoir and can spread contamination, or it's a source of direct exposure. And so, which was something I hadn't thought about previously, but that's the way that they think about it. I was thinking that we'll talk more about what this means in a moment. So we talked about linking unacceptable risk RAOs, right? This is important. And so I'm going to do a real quick summary of our risk assessment process. You develop a conceptual site model. What contaminant is where? How is it moving to what receptor? Risk assessment, what exposure pathway is causing what level of risk to what receptors? In the feasibility study, where you have unacceptable risks, which is based on our basis for action, you evaluate options to address those unacceptable risks. Now, I put this reference here for the basis for action for the new RPMs. This is something you'll become familiar with. It's important. We only take action when there's an unacceptable risk under CERCLA. We don't clean up to zero. We don't clean up everything. And then at the end of all this, you have an RAO, which tells you how will your remedial action change the conceptual site model to eliminate unacceptable risk? How is the action you're going to take do something to the conceptual site model or to the exposure pathways that's going to break that unacceptable risk? And so in the example of the soil RAO, this is a conceptual site model for a risk assessment. And you start with your primary sources, the release, you have a release mechanism, you have a secondary source, you have another transport, then you finally get your exposure media. You have exposure routes, and then you have your receptors. These three pieces of the conceptual site model are part of the soil RAO that we talked about earlier. Now, excuse me, if you have a source control RAO, you're actually over here. And these are the things that you're acting on. We'll talk about that another time. The next step in the risk assessment, or the output of the risk assessment, is a table like this that shows you where you have unacceptable risks. If you have HI over 1, excess cancer risk higher than 10 to the minus 4, you've got an unacceptable risk. And this tells you for residential use scenario, these are the COCs that you have to, oh, no. COCs aren't in this table, but this is the risk that results from the exposure to the COCs. And so what you end up with in the RFS, you have your CSM plus your unacceptable risks, gives you your RAO. And then the output, your RAO works with your cleanup level table in your rod. And so there's some thought at headquarters about suggesting people include in their cleanup level table which RAO they're trying to support. And in the narrative as well for the decision document, like this IC is going to address RAO2. So kind of to review that. Yeah.
It's important to remind people that PRGs are identified at the RFS stage, primarily FS. Cleanup levels can be described in a proposed plan, but are selected in the ROD or decision document. But most of the time, the PRGs become the cleanup levels. Rarely do you see somebody change their PRGs at the ROD.
Yeah, so The way to think about it is, and I didn't appreciate this until I was reviewing it, RAOs for headquarters. In the proposed plan, well, in the feasibility study, you have PRGs. In the proposed plan, you tell the public, we are thinking about choosing this PRG to be our cleanup level. So you really have like a proposed cleanup level. And then in the ROD, and then in the proposed plan, you're asking the public to give you input on that cleanup level. You're asking the public on your RAO, on your cleanup level, on all these things. And they might say, you know what, that cleanup level is wrong. And here's why. And we might make a different decision, we might not. But yeah, and then from that, at the proposed plan, you have a proposed cleanup level at the ROD, then you codify that as a cleanup level. That's right. So we talked about this connection, but from the risk to the RAOs all the way through the remedial components. So these are the remedial components on the ROD that for the RAO that I showed. Excavation, stockpiling, reuse, consolidation, OU4, placement and grade, all these 5-year reviews. These two are the remedial components that actually support the achievement of the RAO, right? So you have to, like, all these other things are here for other reasons, but these are the two things that are going to satisfy that RAO. And then in the groundwater proposed plan that I use as an example, this one was restore groundwater, and this is prevent exposure of humans to groundwater contaminated with COCs, et cetera, et cetera. They had 3 RAOs. No, they have the 2 RAOs, and here are the 3 groundwater remedial components. Treat hexavalent chromium, use groundwater monitoring to make sure that it's effective, and implement institutional controls. The first 2 are in service of the groundwater restoration RAO. The last one is in service of the preventing exposure RAO. So the things that we haven't talked about that we won't have time for is how the 5 components of RAOs are a little bit different. When you have a containment remedy or source control remedy, it's a little different. Like I said, you're kind of working in a different part of the conceptual site model. There are considerations for timing your operational functional determination, which we won't really get into, and then RAOs for intermaxes we won't have time to get into. But are there questions about RAOs before we go to the next piece of this, which I think is maybe still in the RAO? I think it's how to write more effective RAOs.
In the chat.
Questions in the room?
I have a question, but I do want to point out, people, when you inherit a site, you often will get one with an old decision document in which you really can't find or pinpoint RAOs. You just kind of have to infer them from old language. So if you don't see them, you're probably not imagining it.
Right. And you know, if it's your site and you think you need to clean up the RAOs, clean them up. You know, just fix them. Fix the RAOs. If there's a problem, just make the change. You know.
You can't delete your site unless you've met your RAO.
Well, I think the balance point is if you're an old decision document and you're amending the remedy, you get to come up with some revised RAOs. Nothing
Right.
prevents you from doing better RAOs the next time around, being more focused, like Eric said, really being honed in on what am I trying to achieve with this amended remedy, and your RAOs may be different.
Right. Yeah, Kirby Biggs, who's doing deletions at headquarters, he actually did the math. And I think he said, and I don't remember, I'll just say a substantial percentage of deletions have to have a ROD amendment before they can do the deletion. Sorry.
We had a pumpkin tree RAO, and John Sheasley and I got rid of the RAO because we never chose pumpkin trees as part of the remedy.
Right.
So we amended it just to get rid of that.
Yeah.
One last thing, for those that want a little bit more information about risk assessment, I believe there's a training coming up here in Atlanta on risk assessment in June, end of June. And then we also have that 2-hour presentation that we did last month that Tim did, that is posted on the SharePoint site, so you can go check that out.
Cool. Any other questions? All right, so how do we write more effective RAOs? It's kind of big picture comment here. Start with your unacceptable risks and your conceptual site model. Start there. Take apart the RAO into the pieces. And we have 5 components and a purpose. Just kind of take it apart. I'll show you how to do that. Think about how you're going to use that RAO throughout the process, and then make adjustments and talk to your site team, talk to headquarters. then rebuild that RAO based on any changes. And you'll find yourself with a much better, more serviceable RAO. This is how I do it. This is an example from Region 5 on a site that I reviewed their documents. Reduce TC and other COCs and soil vapor from contaminant sources under the property until they reach asymptotic conditions. So I make a table. And if I reviewed your document while I was on my detail, you saw me do this on your documents. I gave you like, here's the 5 components that I think you're using, and then we would talk about it. Does this make sense? So this is what I did. The purpose of action was reduce. We had TCE and other COCs. That's fine. I wasn't clear if the contaminated media was soil and groundwater sources or was it soil vapor. Wasn't clear on that. What's the exposure pathway? It wasn't really stated, but it's probably inhalation or vapor intrusion, but they didn't say what it was. Who are they trying to protect? It's not clear. Probably some human health workers, maybe construction workers, residents. And then this asymptotic conditions is kind of difficult if you, how do you define asymptotic conditions? You know, you could probably get statisticians to argue about that for a long time. So the next step is to kind of take what you think was in the draft REO and then talk through and think about it. And so what we came up with, and this is what we got in there, Rod, massive TC and other COCs, soil and groundwater under the property that's acting as a source was their media. The pathway was inhalation. They went with humans for their receptor. It was kind of like it was really a residence, but it's fine, right? Like that's close enough. And then it's like, you know, then we adjusted this because when I talked to the RPM and I asked her, what are you trying to do? Just tell me like in the terms you would use to talk to a little kid or a grandparent, like, what are you trying to do? No, we're gonna run these vapor mitigation systems. And we might achieve our cleanup goals, we might not, but we're not setting, that's not our goal. Our goal is just to take out what we can. But if we do achieve our cleanup goals, then we're gonna, declare victory. Or they'll at least stop. They will achieve that RAO. And so they added this, to reach asymptotic conditions, which is still pretty vague, but something you could work out in design. Or until the soil, vapor, groundwater, and indoor air reach the cleanup goals based on the risk range that they were using. And they have those numbers. And so that was how we rebuilt it into this RAO is what they ended up choosing. And one of the things about working headquarters is kind of interesting is you're kind of advising people on what to do, but you don't sign it. You're not in the routing chain. You tell the RPM, I think this is, think about the pros and cons of this, but ultimately it's between them and their division director. So their division director signs it. And they've got to navigate all these other relationships on their site team to get something that they can get approved, right? So you kind of like make your best comments and let it go. But that's how I use this, what I call the disassemble and rebuild table. Other tips, make sure your REOs flow from an unacceptable risk and support remedial components. You don't want an REO that doesn't connect to a remedial component at all. We don't have a basis for REOs if they don't accept an unacceptable risk. We don't have a basis for action. We shouldn't be doing REOs. That was actually a pretty common thing that I saw. Remedial components should help and achieve an REO. And then sometimes you have to compromise, satisfy your stakeholders, right? And so how that could be. This was one I saw in Region 1. Implement response action that will minimize impacts to federal and state threatened and endangered bats. And bats were not, there was no unacceptable risk to bats, but this was really important to the state. And they needed it. They needed it to agree to this document. And so it was an REO. And that's okay. But it's really not an REO. It's probably an error or something else, but it's not an REO. But you got to do what you got to do. So we talked about this a little bit already. How we use the REOs evolves. So the FS, what you're trying to do is you're trying to select REOs that will enable you to evaluate and compare response actions. It's a different kind of priority. So it's okay for those REOs to be more vague, for them to have a little more looseness in them because you want to be able to compare different approaches to cleaning up, to solving the problem. When you get to the proposed plan, though, it should describe what you're proposing and how it's going to accomplish that. These are from the ROD guidance. You want to explain the basis and rationale for the RAOs. It's not necessarily inside the RAO, but it's around the RAO. How does it address the risk, identify the risk assessment? Again, that's the basis for action. And then this was something I picked up on that I didn't really think about. If RAOs vary across alternatives, like if you have alternatives that you're evaluating, they can have different RAOs. Like you might have different approaches you're comparing. You can compare pretty different divergent approaches in a proposed plan. You just want to make sure you're clear about the fact that you're doing that. And then in the remedial design stage, what you're trying, the way we use RAO is for the designer to know what is the endpoint for these remedial components. Like, what am I designing for? What am I trying to achieve? So that it's clear to the designer so they can take that into consideration. And then I've got slides from Amanda Van Epps on the rest of the tail end of the remedial process. Do you have a question?
Yeah, Eric, I was just gonna say, number 2 bullet about not being too specific. I see that myself as where people will actually prescribe what they want to be the remedy in their RAO. You're really not supposed to do that. You're supposed to have an RAO is at the FS stage, so alternatives should all be able to meet that RAO. If it can, then it shouldn't be carried forward. So, like you said, you say unduly limited. I would say don't ever have an RAO that writes the specific remedy as the RAO.
Yeah, your RAO should be built, but put it in a landfill.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Your RAO could be.
You could say treatment, but it might be treatment through in situ, ex situ, all different ways to treat, right? You might be descriptive in a term, but not bind yourself and say, this is what I'm gonna do.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. You want to make sure you have a variety, and this kind of gets at it when it talks about having a contaminant level and exposure route. I don't have an example of this in my personal experience, but it points out you can attain protectiveness either by reducing exposure or reducing contaminant levels. So like reducing exposure is like breaking the exposure, reducing contaminant levels, it's like you're leaving it there, but you're removing it, or you're doing something to reduce the concentrations. So, but that's the key is at the FS stage, you're trying to like set the table for evaluating alternatives. So you don't want to tie your hands. So these are the slides that Amanda, she gave me permission to use these. I'm going to so this is where she talks again about the RAO types. And each category, whether it's restoration or containment or a source action, it has different timelines for funding and for time transfer to the states for O&M. And this is where the type of RAO is important. If you have a surface water, groundwater restoration remedy, this is where we conduct a remedial action. We determine that we've reached operational and functional, and then that begins a 10-year LTRA, long-term remedial action. At the end of that 10 years, and it's a clock. At the end of that, it goes to O&M, whether the state's ready for it or not. And so this is important for restoration remedies. You don't want to accidentally put restoration in a ROD if it's not really a restoration remedy. Like if you're not really thinking, you don't really know you're going to make the goals, just like phase the implementation of RAOs or do something so you don't end up starting the clock for restoration too early. Because if you start it too early, you can end up in a little bit of a pickle with the state. For source and groundwater control containment actions, we've got O&M, and O&M starts after that remedial action objectives have been attained. So again, you have to know if you attain the RAOs. You can't, you don't want to get in a fight with the state at the end over that. We do have the O&F determination here. We call this the O&F period. I think that's a little bit of a misnomer, but it's a period after you've finished your RA, you get about a year, at least, no more than a year, to make sure it's functioning the way it's intended to. O&F determination is a point in time. And at that point in time, O&M starts. So that's the important thing to remember. Donna, you've got a look on your face that says you have a question.
Yeah, I just was looking at the language, operation and maintenance measures are initiated after the remedy has achieved the remedial action objectives
For containment actions.
of containment.
For containment actions, right. That's why the type is important. That's why the type of treatment is important. Source treatment actions, and this includes like the source of, direct exposure, so getting the soil off the site and getting it away. There shouldn't be any O&M for a source treatment action. But source treatment actions go until your RAs are achieved. So you need to have a quantifiable way to know that you've achieved your RAO. And then in the 5-year reviews, RAOs are the way we determine if we meet our RAOs, we're protecting human health and the environment. So it's really important that your RAOs tell you what risk you're trying to eliminate so that this is easier on the 5-year review folks. And then these are Amanda's suggestions for RAOs. So make sure the risk drivers are clear, land use is clear, and the purpose of action is clear.
I think it's important though, that you're not really revisiting the RAO in a 5-year review. You're gonna change your RAO, you can't do it as part of a 5-year review. You're gonna have to go back and amend your remedy with ESB or some other decision document that basically says, I am resetting what the objective is of the remedial. So you may be looking at some poorly written and drafted RAOs and some old decision documents that have been a 5-year review. And you might be able to explain away, like, it really meant this, like that restoration objective. We see that where did they intend to clean up the groundwater? It says final action, they were addressing groundwater, it's not clear. You might just assume in the 5-year review report would write that we're assuming this restoration objective, even though it expressly state that.
Right.
But you really can't rewrite them.
Yeah, 5-year reviews are not decision documents. You have to have if you have to change your RAO, it's a decision document territory.
Well, for the RDT.
And in site deletion, there's a number of criteria under the NCP for when you can delete a site from the MPL. The main thing you need to know is that all RAOs have to be achieved before you can delete the site. And this is where Kirby chimed in when I heard this presentation before and said that a lot of deletions require a decision document before you can delete.
Next one. Be sure.
The training?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, so my summary here is make sure you've got RAOs for unacceptable risk, connect them to your components, think about how we use them. Any questions? You guys have been real troopers. We have another segment, but we need to take a break, I think, probably. About an hour?
Nothing in the chat.
Any questions?
All right, we'll take a 5-minute break. We'll be back here at 2. Those on the computer. We'll be back at 2. Thanks.
I saved the most exciting part. I did not. All right, so I'm gonna talk about tools for decision documents. All right, how many people here have not written an EPA decision document yet? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. No, you've done one.
Yeah.
You did one on detail. All right, desolate. All right. Okay. I'm gonna tell you. I assume online that it's about the same. I don't know.
Can we get a reaction online, a thumbs up or a heart if you haven't done a decision document?
Any reaction?
We've got some people that are back and participating. Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to talk about what decision documents are, what they're for, and then how you can get help to write them. Decision documents are, I think, one of our core deliverables as an agency, as a program. Ultimately, we're knowledge workers. We make decisions. That is our job, to make decisions. And It is really important, part of our job. The best case scenario for your decision document is probably Lee's West Side Lead site.
Not mine anymore.
No, but I think it was basically like the draft of the proposed plan to Rod's signature was about 4 months. It was very fast. And we accomplished that.
I put a schedule together and got all the stakeholders in a room and made everyone commit to the schedule. I'm looking at John Cheesley.
She made us commit.
I had them sign their name in blood.
I think we're gonna have to put you on we need a case study, if you haven't written one up yet.
Yeah.
Good, yeah, we need
You're
that.
not talking about September, like, where you, proposed plan meeting, get the RFI signed, and like a week later, like, I did. A month.
A month, that's pretty fast. So, what Lee did is she shared the draft FS with a lot of folks to take a look at it. I was at headquarters on my detail and I gave her some input on the RAOs at the FS stage, which helped make all the subsequent deliverables better and easier to review. I gave her, I think, a Word version of the proposed plan outline and checklist, but I may have also given you a template. I don't remember if I gave you a template or not. But we had minimal comments on the proposed plan, Ryan. It was just a really great experience. So 4 months is pretty good. Our average, I think, was like 3 months between the proposed plan draft to the proposed plan issuance. So that's like 3.5 months was the average. And then like 5.2 months or something between the issuance of the proposed plan to the ROD signature. So that's kind of like where we're at. We have some extreme numbers on both steps of that kind of make it hard to give you a summary statistic, but that's about where it is.
Routine. You can't forget your state counterparts, you can't forget your attorneys, you can't forget headquarters, you can't forget SSS. You have to work collaboratively and collectively together.
Hey, who's SSS?
Scientific support center. Yeah.
Form TSS, right?
Yeah, Tim's group. So in the ROD guidance, it talks about what is the purpose of the record of decision. And this is true also for your ESDs and ROD amendments. It has a lot of different roles. That's one of the things that makes it complicated and a pain. It's a legal document. It is a summary of the technical rationale and of what's in the AR. It shouldn't be a regurgitation of FS and the RI. It is also a technical document that helps the designer of the remedy come up with the design and outlines, here's the remedial action objectives again, and the cleanup levels for the selected remedy. And it's a communication tool for the public. So it's a document with a lot of different audiences and purposes, so that makes it complicated. Which is one of the reasons that it's helpful to have tools to help make it easier for you. And the first, I kind of have the whole list of tools. The NCP, of course, gives you your regulatory requirements. The guidance, the ROD guidance or the decision document guidance is pretty good. It gives you instructions on how to meet those regulatory guidance. It's actually a very good guidance. It's very old. It has checklists in it. We'll talk about those. We'll talk about templates. We'll talk about some new tools that we're calling ROD and proposed plan builders. In Region 4, you can also talk to your section chief, your senior RPM, or me. I've helped a number of people with decision documents. And then, of course, at headquarters, SARDB is the part of headquarters that reviews our decision documents. SARDB is the site assessment remedial decisions branch. Bill Denman is the branch chief up there. He used to be a section chief in my section and was an RPM here for 16 years before he became section chief, or maybe 18, I don't know. But Bill is trying to set a tone in that group to have a lot more early engagement and trying to encourage that and thinking about ways that their group can support regions broadly speaking. We'll talk a little bit more about what they're doing, but anytime you can get an early review of the pieces of your FS that are important, and that's helpful. Headquarters doesn't need your whole FS. If they could just see like your risk summary, your RAOs, that's probably a really good start because a lot of problems are going to come from those things not being clear.
So Eric, is that still Heather meeting? And then I think we have one other person too. How many do we have like, or you just,
It's Heather I mean, I think it's still Heather. So when Heather went on detail, I went on detail behind Heather. There are some new people in up there in that group, and I don't know how they're dividing the work, but it's kind of sometimes it can be a little bit of I'm covered up. Can you cover this? So you might occasionally get somebody else. Like I pitch hit for somebody in region 5. So you never know, right? But it's Heather is the main. She's like the liaison, right, to get to that group. So this is what the guidance looks like. I don't know. Has anybody seen this guidance before? A couple of old timers have. This guidance is actually pretty good. It's from '99. This is one of those PDFs that I've got all marked out. What's that?
I remember before.
Oh, sorry, Hillary. I didn't mean to violate the age discrimination policy.
Only seasoned.
Seasoned.
RPM.
So this is a pretty good document. I recommend everybody, create, get a PDF and work it and mark it up. It's very helpful. What is in it? I'm not going to read this to you. This is basically a table of contents. I put this up here because I want you to understand these are the things that you can get out of it. How do you do a proposed plan? Why do you do a proposed plan? How do you do a ROD? Section by section, what's in each section of the ROD? ESDs, ROD amendments, no action, interim action, phase. This is a key thing about the ROD guidance that everybody needs to keep in mind. The ROD guidance has like this basic overall, like here's how you do a ROD. And then they have like these sections later on in the document that if you want to do a groundwater remedy, they've got another chapter about certain remedy selection situations like TI waivers and groundwater and lead. And then in Appendix B, they talk about phased approaches and NAPLs. And it's very, it's not really well documented that if you're working on a site like we have a phased remedy, when you're working with the ROD guidance, you should read that section about how to write a ROD, but then also read the section about a phased remedy so that you know that it's like chunks of the outline that you kind of bolt on to the basic outline, right? It's like a cookbook where they tell you how to make a pancake, and then at the end they're like, oh, you can also put bananas in the pancake or chocolate in the pancake or nuts in the pancake, and you can make a different kind of pancake, right? So you just have to be aware of that. The document as a whole covers a lot of material. So this is an example of the ROD proposed plan outlining checklist. Now it says see chapter 3 ROD guidance for more information, but this is a really good checklist. If you are working on a proposed plan or a ROD, they have similar things, you should try to follow the structure in this outline as closely as you can. It'll make your life a lot easier because everybody has seen it before. All the pieces are going to be where they're expected them to be. And if you follow the points and the outlines, then you won't leave out anything that's important. This is the more detailed discussion in chapter 3 about proposed plans. So here's a little summary of the major sections. It tells you what they're supposed to do. Then, here's questions for site background that you want to answer. Now, all these are not going to be applicable to your site, but it's really helpful to have a little cheat sheet. Oh, let me go back. This right here is the language I stole from the ROD guidance about RAOs. So this has a lot of discussion about a lot of policy stuff and how you're going to meet the regulations and interpretations of the NCP in here. This also has several highlights that have standard language for different important parts of the ROD. This is about the statutory preference for treatment. Kind of gives you 2 different versions of this. Now you probably have gotten a ROD where the statutory language is based on somebody else's ROD that they wrote like 5 years ago, and that was based on one from 5 years before that. And every time you write a ROD, you kind of tweak the language a little bit to make it make sense for your site, right? And so if you're inheriting language that's been tweaked like 3 times and you don't know it, Well, now you're dealing with like a perversion of what the language is supposed to be. It's like a game of telephone through the ages, right? So just go back to the original language occasionally and, you know, see if there's not a phrase or something in there that's not really supposed to be there that you don't need. Because often we get ourselves in hot water because we're trying to say something we don't need to say in that part of the document. You know what I mean? Like we don't need to be going into it. It's like you open a can of worms. One thing I'll tell you guys about working headquarters. When you work at headquarters, you kind of get this, you kind of make the assumption that everybody has the same work style that you do. Everybody is sending you something and they are completely comfortable with what's on the page. And you read it and it doesn't make sense. And you're like, what are they talking about? This makes no sense. Are they idiots? What's going on? And so I had to really be careful to step back, like, okay, I have to make sure I give them the benefit of the doubt. Like maybe they didn't explain it correctly. Maybe they're not idiots, but maybe they have misspoken or there's some bad language or there's something they missed and they don't really mean what it says on the page. But if you assume that what is on the page is what they meant to say, like it's really like, what are they doing? And these documents, like you are the author of the ROD, like kind of theoretically. These are really like team writing exercises, right? Where people are marking it up and doing comments and like getting versions mixed up. And it's just, can be a real mess. So, you know, try to extend, you know, some grace to people and give them the benefit of the doubt. But anyways.
David.
Oh, no. I'm talking about when I was at headquarters. But so then when you've got the other highlights are things like tips for documenting the scope and role section when you have more than one operably in it. All of these highlights, and there's probably 30 or 40 or 50 highlights in there, and they're really good. And because the document is so seasoned, you can't copy and paste any of this language out of it because it's broken. Like it's formatted funny, like they generated this on a word star or something and then scanned it into PDF. So anyways, nobody knows what who knows what word star is? We're the seasoned ones.
We were suing Microsoft in the 90s. There was bad blood.
Yeah.
Government.
All right, so one of the good things in the raw guidance are some nice figures that you can send to your contractors. Say, here, make it look like this. This can really help make your life easy. And the way that I got the conceptual site model I showed you is I sent this to them. I said, make it look like this, guys. Come on. I don't need you to recreate the wheel here. This is there's also a sample outline and checklist for ESCs and ROD amendments. Let me tell something about ROD amendments. ROD amendments have the same basic outline as an ESD. It's simpler than a ROD. It's a little different, but it is, you're allowed to use it. You don't have to automatically go back to the more complicated ROD outline. Now you might want to, depending on your situation, but when you're doing a ROD amendment or an ESD, you basically follow the same outline. And you want to make sure you're checking all the boxes, right? You want to make sure you do it, provide the information you need, but you can save yourself some energy if you step back and start from the outline. So there are a bunch of checklists in here. I'm not going to read these, but there's just a bunch of checklists. This is what they look like. There's a management review checklist, which the manager's never used on 12 questions that should be addressed by a ROD. It's highlight 639. That's how many, like that's a lot of highlight. But it's like the 12 questions. And if your ROD answers these things, you're pretty much in the right track. This is the proposed plan outline checklist. Is 3 pages, 5-page ROD outline and checklist. Of course, like I said, it would be modified if you're going to do a phase remedy or something like that. I think a lot of RPMs have done what I've done and adapted these checklists into Word documents. I can share these with you guys. I've shared them with folks from time to time. This one is the outline and checklist for proposed plan, and I kind of annotated it and merged, this is for my own use, merged the checklist with the language from the ROD guidance, and then some notes that I've taken along the way, like word counts for some of the stuff that I've read. Like, I think that one of the helpful things in doing proposed plans is to how to give people a constraint, especially contractors that get paid by the page. So, if your contractor is writing an RFS, like they're gonna make it 300 pages. But if you tell them you got 80 pages and that's all you got, then that makes them focus a little bit more. So anyways, this is the outline from the ROD outline, in a Word document. People have got these all over. I was on a work group, and lots of people have done this kind of thing. We talk about templates. We have like a 5 review template. Anybody use, well, we have a 5 review template. There's talk about ROD templates. A lot of people use the most recent ROD or the most recent approved ROD. Don't do that. Do not do that. Please do not do that. It will make your life harder. If you can get a standard template, and I've got one I can give you, there are standard templates. Headquarters thing about supporting the development of some standard templates. And then you can also just start with the outline from the guidance. That to me is the best way to do it. You start with the outline and just populate the outline with more and more detail until you have a document. That's my preference. Region 3 has a template that they've been, yes, ma'am.
Eric,
What's up?
so I'm just curious. I have heard in Region 4 through the years at a PRP leading site. Sometimes, of course, the PRPs want to write the ROD.
Surely do.
And yes, of course they do, right? And I'm just curious as RPMs, how y'all deal with that? Because no doubt they are all about, hey, let me help you. Here's the draft. Let me do this section for you. Let me do this. I'm just curious if y'all have a way of dealing with it, if you personally dealt with it, how you ever so gently.
I just tell them that it's an EPA function to write the ROD.
People on the.
Oh, did you guys hear that? Anybody hear that question online? I'm testing my speaker.
No, we did not.
All right.
Tell them no.
So the question was, what do you do when a PRP says, let me help you write the ROD? Let me just give you a draft ROD. and help
No,
you
it's
out.
our document. They don't write our rides. It's an EPA document. No.
Sounds like Ken Jones.
Mary Johnson asked that question, Kim Jones. Did you know that?
Set up.
And
All
a
right.
no. And she already knew the answer. That's why she put it out there.
I know she knew the answer.
Testing us.
I'd like to reinforce, they're gonna try really hard. They're gonna really, really try. And RPMs have the biggest jobs in the world. And so I just put that out there. No one can hear you on the computer. Well, that's good. Campbell just yell at him.
So, yeah, I mean, if you know, the PRPs can do the RI, they can do the FS, they can do tables, they can do figures. They shouldn't be writing the ROD. The ROD is, you know, something the RPM is responsible for. The most important part of the ROD is what we call the remedial logic, right? Your basis for action, your RAOs, and your proposed and selected remedies. I even like the RPM really needs to understand that selected remedy because you have to defend it, right? Yes, go ahead, Donna.
Oh, sometimes the littlest, stupidest things, get me stalled. One is that conceptual site model. Is there a template for that? Do people do those in PowerPoint?
I have.
Get that laid out.
Yeah, I have a slide on that. I don't think it's in this.
RSS guidance.
Well, yeah, but I have some recommended language for that.
I don't mean just language, like making it look that, putting your boxes where they need to be. Yeah, that's good. I didn't have at the time it came up, I didn't have a contractor who could do it. Yeah.
Yeah, so a question about like graphically, how do you put together that box and whisker or box and arrows figure? I think that you can do it in Excel if you have to. I think you can do it as a table. I think that you can do it in PowerPoint. I don't have a template, I don't think, because I always get it as a PDF. What I've done with my sites is we kind of like have a working session on that, and we talk through, each of those components, and then we work with a draft document, a draft figure, and then get to a final figure. There's a bunch of ways that I think you could do it, but there's no right or wrong answer.
Yeah, because I remember I called headquarters years ago on that. I was like, okay, you've got this figure here. How do I get a figure like that? And they're like, get your contractor to do it like we did.
Well, on the PRP lead site, on the PRP lead site where they're doing RFS, you can, they'll write their contractor, so put the, and sometimes you get a conceptual site model that's a picture, nice little colorful picture, cartoons, you can do both. I mean, there's neither one, but they basically cover the same information. I just want to say one thing on federal facility sites for those RPMs that have to work on federal facilities. The lead agency is not EPA. It'll be another federal agency. And so they are going to be responsible for writing the ROD. And you, fortunately, will only have to review it and not have to draft it. So it's a lesser lift.
Right.
But still should look at the guidelines, the guidance, the outlines and the templates. And
EPA selects the remedy.
we jointly select the remedy with the lead agency, so it is important that RPMs are comfortable with everything that's in that ROD, that it's, consistent with our policy and guidance, meets NTP requirements and so forth. One other thing, Eric and I worked on a group at headquarters called the ROD Mod Work Group. It fizzled out, but it was trying to get.
It was murdered.
It was, but it was a year plus effort, and we were going to have templates for every section of the ROD, and I had boilerplate language for compliance with ARAR. So if any ROD, everybody that gets a ROD, you want the ARAR stuff, we have it in ORC to kind of give you a kind of canned language. And that's kind of, plug and play is what we're trying to do, but site specific.
All right, David is gonna have an ARARS.
But no, I think it's important. Eric's trying to show us how you can get resources.
Right. So, one other question about the table, the formatting. We have a program available through the Microsoft 365 or SharePoint or somehow called Visio. And Visio is a flowchart program. And I think that might be the best tool that we have to use it. I've not used it for much, but we have it. You have to access it through through the apps on the website or something. I'm not really. You do it through the browser on, when you go to SharePoint. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How similar is your ROD to your proposed plan? Very different? Should you not even pull from the proposed plan for those?
So the question is, how similar is the proposed plan on the ROD? And so the way that the way that I look at it is the feasibility study gives you a lot of detail about a lot. You want to summarize that in the proposed plan for the public so they can understand it and comment on what you're planning on doing. When you write the ROD, you're summarizing again what was in the feasibility study and the proposed plan, and you're also laying out why the selected remedy is appropriate. And so a lot of times it is helpful to draw some of the summary discussion from the proposed plan, because you've already gone through all this effort to summarize the last 50 years of investigations. And there's no need to go back to the to the FS to get that, right? And if you look at the outlines, I don't know that you'll see it on this, but there's a slightly, you don't see it, but there's a different order. The first part of there's a different order of content. And what I've done before is, try to figure out actually have this in an Excel table where this part of the proposed plan goes to this part of the ROD and this part goes to this part. It's kind of a shuffle. And that's one of the reasons I think it's helpful to start from the outline for the ROD, because then you kind of see the little pieces and the narrative is a little different. It's a little awkward because, it's such a complicated document, but that narrative is a different narrative in the ROD. But in terms of the content and the editing and the writing, a lot of you still have the same kind of audience, it's still a public facing document, so I think you can borrow a lot of language. I would love for us to be able to just you know, like the proposed plan becomes the, you know, part of the ROD and you add a front and a back and you're done, but that's not where we're at. So, does that answer your question? It is better to draw language from the proposed plan than the feasibility study usually, right? Or the risk assessment or whatever. And often what I'll do is make sure my risk assessment summary documents, like executive summaries and like that language should be close to what I want for the ROD. Now, if I had like a staff of people to do this, then we would, you know, generate, you know, outlines for risk assessment and RINFS that summarize that information in a way that you can really just bring it directly in the ROD, but I don't have that kind of staff.
Next
I
question.
don't have any staff. Sorry.
Are you applying to the
No,
docket?
I still have, I'm not gonna have staff in the
Yeah,
next
there's
5 years.
There's
For
another
sure.
If you're in a time crunch, can you start a ROD and proposed plan in parallel?
Absolutely. If you're in a crunch, you can, or if you're not in a crunch, you can do all these things concurrently. The program is designed to run concurrently.
I would not write your selected remedy
Well,
portion of the ROD until your proposed plan public comment period is over. If you have an active community and it may change.
yeah, I mean, so what the things that you can run concurrently are the, a lot of the history and background, you know, like, you know, that's not going to change. But Lee's right, you know, the core of the process is, and we saw it in the NCP, like top level, you know, stuff, what's in the NCP, community involvement's front center. So you can't draft your selected remedy until you know what your comments are going to be, because you might change it. I mean, we change them. That's what it's for. And it's okay to change your remedy between your proposed plan and your ROD. That's what public comment is for. So don't be too attached. One of the pieces of advice I gave somebody is don't be attached to the outcome of your ROD. Because it's like, it is not just ours. I mean, we want to move it forward. We have our ideas about what we think is the best thing to do, but you know, we're working in somebody else's backyard. We're in somebody else's neighborhood. We're in somebody else's community. We've got a lot of stakeholders. And so, you know, it's okay if things don't, you know, just let things evolve. It's all right. So.
Last thing, it looks like Drew put in the chat a CSM Excel spreadsheet.
Nice. The new hires coming to the rescue.
His kids.
I used to do that when I was young, but I don't anymore.
Kids sewed tablets back in the day.
The Region 3 template, this looks a lot like the 5-year review template. Yeah, I don't know if you guys, how much you guys have seen this 5-year review template, but it has like excerpts from the guidance in the document. And it has a bunch of technical guidance links to guidance and technical information. And it's good. I've used it to write documents. It's helpful. I can share this. This is one of the things that was shared during that RODMA work group. One of the limitations here is that you've got a lot of existing text that you've got to manage and deal with, right? So that brings us to the ROD and proposed plan builders is what we call them. This idea is to have a blank Word document that doesn't have any content in it except for the structure, like the bones of the document, right? It's got the table of contents formatting so that your section numbers will automatically update with table of contents, table of figures, table of tables, appendices, page numbers. We can lock down the paragraph formatting and the styles so that you can't have the wrong format text in there. It also, because it follows the outline, it prompts the RPM to have the right content in the right place. We've got some versions that people are piloting now, and if they're useful, we can manage and update the files. Headquarters paid SKIO to develop one of them. Region 4 paid SKIO to update the other one. And this is what the proposed plan builder looks like. This is kind of that one column, single column format. We could create one with 2 column if you prefer that, doesn't matter. Some regions have really snazzy proposed plans. Ours are really basic. But it's got your section title and subsection titles, and then just like a thing, input text, and you just click on that and cut and paste your stuff in there. And it's like impossible. I'm not gonna say that you have to intentionally decide to exclude content. I'll say it that way. So like problems addressed by the OU. What's the basis for the OU or the proposed plan? Like, why is this the OU what it is? Like, you know, these are things that often are left out. Like, does this action address source material? What is there a principal threat waste present or not? Like that often is just something that gets left out. And so you could delete it, but you're kind of doing it on purpose, right? So it's on you. But this is what the proposed plan builder looks like, and this is what the ROD. This is just the first part of the ROD builder, but you can see the table of contents. You know, it's got a bunch of subsections and things, and you don't need all these probably, but you've got them, right? And so you have the ability, like in the site characteristics section, that can really have a lot of fluctuation, but you want to make sure you hit these things. This one is, well, it doesn't say how many pages it is, does it? It's a lot of pages, like the blank document's like 30 pages, I think. So anyways, there are some more tools in development. Headquarters SARDB and this is CPMB is the post-construction branch. They're working, we're going to do an RAO training. I'm going to help with that. And we're also going to present the top 10 questions to ask when preparing decision documents. Both of those will be at NARPM. SARDB is also working on additional support with trainings, possibly templates, tip sheets, ROD builders, other types of tools. If you have an idea for a tool, let us know. I think the idea like this, if that spreadsheet works, we need to, you know, find a way to share that. Well, I mean, if it works for Donna, I mean, if it works for Donna. And in a piecemeal way, we're slowly bringing the RFS guidance and the ROD guidance into modern age. I have, and it's like I go into the Word document or in the PDF and like pull out the text and reformat it so I can send it to a contractor and say, when you write, you know, the evaluation of long-term protectiveness, here's what the criteria are. It's in the guidance. It's in the RAS guidance. Well, if you don't know it's there because the guidance from '89, you know, then, you know, you're not going to have the correct criteria in your evaluation. So we're working on that. That's going to take some time. We may accelerate pieces of that effort if they look to be fruitful. Any questions? I think that's it.
That's a question.
Well, I guess one more statement, but.
Preach it. That's all right.
Speak really loudly, please.
I did not see anything about like contact critical action memos and ECAs. Those are decision documents as well. So I think in the future, we're probably gonna do a lot more often because these interim actions will get those funded. We may not get RODs funded. That's another tool in the chest, you know, although they're really hard to get approved without the site being on the MPO, even though the NCP says it doesn't have to be on the MPO. But, and then make sure you also know that you have to have a ROD for every OU. I didn't see that mentioned too. Like if you have multiple operable units on a site, don't you have to have a ROD for each OU?
So let me talk about the first thing first, the first point first. There are efforts to improve support for non-time critical removal actions. It was kind of outside the scope of this talk. In terms of RAOs, you have removal action objectives, very similar conceptually to a remedial action objective. But there are efforts by SARDB to help make that faster. Like out west, where the uranium mine sites are, you know, they got to do like 90 RODs, or action memos, or 300, you know, like in 10 years or something. It's just like an insurmountable amount of work. And so finding ways to make decisions, document decisions faster is really important. I've always believed that the biggest threat to our program is that we're too slow. We're just too slow. And I think that's a real problem. We shouldn't have sites that are waiting for a cleanup for longer than the exposure period we use in our risk assessment. You know what I mean? Like that's crazy. That's crazy. So So yeah, I think, you know, you can look forward to seeing some efforts from headquarters on those decision on non-time criticals as well. In terms of like, do you need a rod for every OU? I'll say this about OUs. OUs are a tool to help you expedite the cleanup, right? It's in the NCP, like why you have an OU, why you would use an OU strategy. It should be a tool that makes your life easier. OUs can change, OUs can evolve. You define the OU in a decision document, right? Like, it's really when it's written down in a rod, that's when I think the OU is kind of written, like set. You can have a rod that addresses multiple OUs. You can have a rod that amends a decision for an OU and makes a decision for a different OU. You can combine OUs later. You can create a new OU if you need to. So just like use that as a tool to make your life easier, not harder. Don't let that, you know, framework and like decisions of the past, you know, like slow you down or get in your way. Yes, Mary.
I don't know.
You want the speaker here? I'm going to bring you the speaker. My experiment.
So, and this may get lawyers kicked out of this, but I'm going to make a plug for where legal issues come into that very concept about should I do a rod now for this piece that's kind of small. There's a statute of limitations for us to collect money, and there's one for removal money and remedial, and that's all I'm going to say. But the way case law is right now, the very first rod can start a clock on us that, you know, in Maurice's group, the cost recovery group isn't here anymore. Felicia left, but you know, this is their thing. They have to do. You guys clean up sites, they get the money in, right? But that clock starting can have huge implications on our ability to collect the money. And so I'm just going to make a pitch because it's a great tool. OUs, we see them all the time, breaking up the cleanup. But there can be big impacts to another part of the case, which is the money part, which you guys don't as much have to worry about, but it's still, you know, part of the function of the agency about recovering our costs when it's fund lead. So just consider maybe, you know, an asterisk somewhere in here that when y'all start making these decisions about, because an example that happens is where, you know, municipalities' drinking water well, their intake is impacted. And we want to quickly go ahead and address that. And we do it. And we've done it several times. Fast rod, get that water line in there, or move the well, whatever it is decided. And then we may not do the remedy, you know, for years and years. And we've got the chronic risk stabilized. You know, it takes us a lot of time. Well, we could really, and we don't even know how much costs are coming, right? I mean, to get rid of the groundwater contamination that caused the county's water line to be a mess or their intake well to be a mess. And so we don't even know how much money we may be putting at risk. So I'm talking more than I should, but I just want to put a little plug in for those kind of decisions. It's really good to go out to your whole team when you're thinking about the strategy for your site and how many rods you want to do, because there are other impacts that you guys wouldn't know about. I mean, this is our job to do. And so just,
That's good.
it can for another statute of limitations, which is removal costs. And actually, and this is going to get where it gets really thick in the weeds, and I don't want to do that to y'all. And, you know, your excellent presentation. But really, those kind of issues you should talk with your case team about, because there are certain things that trigger the clocks, which, you know, then we run out of time. It can be 3 years or 6 years. So I'll just send you back to say, yeah, there could be a trigger that happens, and it's good to talk to your lawyer about it and just see what the implications are.
Because even with, it's one of Eric's first slides from the CP, it talked about we're supposed to consider rapid. You know, like I have a site right now where if 2 years ago they would have dug a hole in the ground, the source would have been taken care of.
Right.
But we've been going through writing this plan, writing that plan, getting these people to do that. It's taken, I could have had it done 2 years ago. But I feel like I'm following the process because that's the way we have to go to get the money, honestly.
Yeah.
Right? Doesn't make a lot of sense sometimes in this job.
It doesn't.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of considerations and enforcement considerations are part of that. And that's, you know, you want to make sure that you do talk with your team to understand what those considerations are. You're still not going to let people drink contaminated water because you've got an enforcement consideration, but there might be a way to go about it that's smarter, you know, that avoids some of those unintended consequences.
Well, and I'll just, an easy plug for this is, and it can be tricky, but you can go to parties where you haven't figured it out yet, and you can get what's called a tolling agreement. And then we're safe, we're good. That tolls that clock. And that can be something, but if we didn't know or think about it, didn't get that, then we may lose that case against that party. But there are definite, your point very well taken. It's not to control how the site gets cleaned up. Risk is the driver, and maybe cutting it into hunks is the best way to do it. It's just there are then other things we could do to maybe save parts of the cases or whatever.
Right.
Is the point.
And I think this goes back to your team and including your team. I think that's an important part, including enforcement, you know.
Yeah, Lee was saying that's why, you know, the team approach and making sure enforcement part of your team is important. Yeah.
But, you know, I believe Alina's still continuing this, but we had bi-weekly calls with the removal program, with the remedial program, SSS, you know, our CICs, just everyone, enforcement, everyone was, and I'm sure continuing to be part of these calls. So we're all on the same page.
Right. So, yeah, that's a great example of how complicated things can get. And like I said, the RPM is the individual whose job it is to make the recommendations about cleaning up the site, and everybody else has a different job. That's a great example. The enforcement folks have got a different part of the NCP that they work to support, right? And the decision maker in those discussions is going to be the division director. And so you can, you know, if you find yourself in a knot like that, you know, that's the kind of thing where you elevate it to management and get it in front of the decision maker as soon as you can. And there are a lot of creative ways that you can go about doing these things. Some of that is what the site strategy effort is intended to do. And I'm sure most of you have been involved with site strategies at one point or another, but that's part of the idea behind that is to have a formalized, you know, written statement of what our strategy is and what we're going to do. And you can use that as an RPM. The way that I try to use it is as a tool to get everybody on the same page. Make sure my management is informed about what we're trying to achieve and that they support it. And I use that my site strategy to send briefings to management, to updates to headquarters, you know, to document, like, oh gosh, what was the example? I want to remember this example. It was a great, beautiful example. It wasn't an enforcement issue. It was something else. We had a decision to make about whether we were going to go forward with the proposed plan or we're going to accept community input, take a step back, do more sampling and make a different decision. And I wanted to step back, change land use, get more data, make a different decision. And not everybody in the management chain felt that way. I use a site strategy and a risk register. You may hear that in the future to say, here's the pros and cons of this route. Here's the pros and cons of this route. Wrote it down on paper, sent it to everybody, briefed it. And what that does is it gives me a way to organize my thoughts and to pitch it to people and explain why I want to do this way. And it also kind of puts on management, like, are we going to accept this recommendation from this RPM to go this way or not? Right. And if they had said, no, we're going to go a different way, that'd be fine. I would accept that and move on. But I've made sure to cover, like, my technical recommendation is this. And one of the best things about working for the government is you get to have a technical recommendation that's independent from anybody else, right? You get to say, this is what I think is the right thing to do. This is why I think this is the right thing to do. Everybody else gets to do that too. So it could be a real pain when your hydro sees it one way and your attorney sees it the other way. And we all have this same like protection as civil servants that we get to, this is what we think is the thing to do. And this is why. And your manager should never come to you and be like, you need to change your opinion. Now, the decision maker can say, thanks for your opinion. We're going to do something else. But that comes with the territory, right? So, but it's a wonderful thing about being here, about this job. Yeah, go ahead.
Just for the newer folks, do you want to elaborate a little bit on site strategy? Because they probably have no idea what
Sure,
it is
yeah.
or where it comes from.
Yeah. So, how do I start? So like how are you gonna clean up a site? Like your elevator pitch, how are you gonna clean up a site? What are you gonna do? How are you gonna clean up your site?
How?
Yeah, how? What's your strategy?
Olin, go.
For Olin, what's your strategy? My strategy for Kermit Nevada is we are going to clean up parts of the site to expedite parts of the site being available for reuse. We're trying to get them through the system as fast as the chunks of the site out of Superfund as fast as we can. That's our strategy. Everything we do is organized around that thought. So we have an OU that's a no action OU. We have an OU that's a simple excavation OU, UE, no ICs, done. So 50% of the site is going to be deleted from the MPL at the end of next year. And we're working our way to the most complicated part of the site. That was a different strategy than we had 10, 12 years ago, because our strategy used to be, we're going to work on the source area first. We're going to try to work on the worst first, because I thought it was going to be fund lead and I needed to make the case for money, and you don't get money for no actions, right? You get money based on risk. Now, so I had to make sure that I quantified, like, here's the risks to the critters, and here's the groundwater contamination and the NAPL. And so I need to make the best case for funding, right? But, you know, we shifted our strategy. So that your strategy, like on one level, is like an elevator pitch. What do you tell your boss? Hey, how's it going at this site? Oh yeah, we're going to try to clean up the lead contaminated yards, the ones that are highest. We're going to clean up first. And he's like, that's great. Good job.
Well, also headquarters has a.
Oh, I'm getting there.
Oh.
So that's like your first level. I'm getting there. I'm sorry. I mean, out of time? What's going on here? 5 minutes. Sorry. I'm just trying to fill up 2 hours. So your formalized site strategy is a document that headquarters has developed over the last several years. Having formalized written site strategies has been like a 10 or 15 year effort. We finally have a template. Headquarters has contract support to help you write a site strategy for your sites. If your site is not construction complete yet, it's kind of in the group of sites that are eligible for this support. You can do a site strategy for any site though. And it's like a 3 to 5 or 7 page summary of what's going on at the site, what your priorities are, what tasks you need to achieve under CERCLA to achieve your goals. So you have not just RAOs, but you have like your overall site goals, and then the actions and steps to achieve those goals. Like, what are you going to do? Short-term goals, long-term goals. What are you going to do in the next 2 years? What are you going to do in the next 5 years after that? Where are you trying to go to? So that's what a site strategy is. It can take you 3 to 8 hours to think about it and write it up and get it done. If you have contract support, you can maybe do it in about 3 hours. What we're trying to do, and I'm one of the site strategy champions in the region, what we're trying to do is have a 1 hour call, like a scoping call with the RPM, let headquarters contractor draft it, and then you spend, maybe you spend another hour or two finalizing it, right? So that's what formal site strategies are about. It's a pretty good tool.
Yeah. And you can have goals that aren't just clean up the site. It could be educate the community. How do you do that? Maybe you have a really complicated community, so you need to kind of strategize on how to meet that goal.
Right. And part of the site strategy is to come up with obstacles and proposals to solutions. So if your management is pressing on you to move site forward and you say, look, I need $250,000 of support to do this or to do that, you can write it down in your site strategy. Here's my challenge. Here's what I think I need to fix this problem. Please give it to me. Give it to your manager. If your manager is still giving you a hard time next year or 2 years from now, you say, hey, remember the site strategy? I requested money. to do this, and I didn't get it. So go ahead.
I just wanted to say, Rob made a note that headquarters does not currently support site strategies for federal facilities.
That's right. Yeah, private side sites. Okay, any other questions? We're almost out of time. Yes, ma'am.
Not related, but kind of related. Do we have all this information on a SharePoint somewhere? Or is this just kind of, you should know who to ask to get these like guidelines and outlines? And I've been recently like looking for things.
It's hard to find things.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is hard to find things. And I think that, talking to other people in your section or your section chief is really like the first step. Every time we hire new people, whoever the new person is, one of their jobs is to write down everything you learn as a new person. And so we share that with the next group of new people. And I'm not aware of that, ever happening. The federal facilities RPM, somebody in fifth row at headquarters recently put together a new RPM toolkit. And that is something that I think is shared now. Is that published yet? It's not yet. But I think it should, if it's not ready yet, it should be soon. And it does a good job of putting a lot of information and links in one place.
Two different things, Eric.
That's super fun.
What's that, Rob? Hold on. What's that, Rob?
It's two different things. There's an existing RPM toolkit that was done by NARPM, I think back in 2016. And then there is the Federal Facility RPM Survival Kit that Headquarters Fifth Row put out. So those are two different things. The RPM toolkit's a little older, more basic, and then the thing that Fifth Row has done is brand new and has a lot more in it. It's more updated.
Rob, is that Fifth Row?
We have it.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's out. Okay,
Yes,
we
it's
can
out.
circulate that. Yeah, we'll circulate both of those documents.
Based on the SharePoint site. Well, Siobhan has a lot of resources already on the training page, and I don't know if she has those particular documents in there, but it's arranged so that some of them are links just to other, headquarters documents and things. I don't know if are you familiar with the training page on the Superfund SharePoint site?
Yeah, I could look there for some stuff I was finding back in my head.
My guidance document.
Recommendation for something to include on there, send it to me or Siobhan.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, we'll try to get those circulated. I have a folder on OneDrive that has all my references in it. It's like 1,000 documents. In SIMS, there are special collections for lots of different things. And I think that the guidance section is like 10,000 documents or something like that. So it's really an intimidating amount of stuff, right? So I think that often word of mouth and sharing it with your colleagues is really one of the most valuable things, and being able to see people in person is lovely. I really am glad you guys made the trip out to Norcross today to be here.
Thank you so much. Megan, to your point, that's what these trainings I'm hopeful to accomplish. Like, now know that Eric's a champion for these type strategies, to build that consistency and all the trainings will be posted online. So hopefully that will fill a gap a little bit.
Yeah.
You're looking
And then you guys can figure out what it is to be an RPM in less than 5 years. I hope, because we need you guys. Okay, is that it? Thank you, everybody.
Just stay for a minute so we can do introductions quickly. That'd be great. All right.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, everyone.